You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All right, and welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing well on this fine Tuesday evening. Excited to honestly, I'm excited that we're in 2-team breakdowns instead of 3, just a little bit. Like, it's easier to kind of wrap my head and focus around what's going on. 3 teams is quite a bit to tackle some weeks. So I'm glad we getting into the 2-teamers. We can get into some different kind of subtopics, right, as we get through some of these at the end of the show, which is always nice. But overall, I'm doing dandy. Derek, happy belated Father's Day to you.
To both of you, happy belated Father's Day.
Thank you, sir. It was nice. Got to go out and hit the round ball with my wife. So took her out and we went golfing. So it was fun.
That's exciting. And a happy Father's Day, belated Father's Day to everybody out there. It is roasty toasty down here in the Lone Star State. So I can tell you that air conditioning is my best friend. It sucks that we're in late June. So it's going to be hot, but it's hot. He's hot. So let's get through this.
You could have it where, Kevin and I have been dealing with this for you couldn't go outside for the last month and a half because it's been rainy and swampy and everything else.
Dodging hailstones.
To the point now where it's starting to get to the point where it's almost too hot during the day. Like, it's just starting to get to that point where you went through and you didn't really have that nice spring thing. It was wet and windy and rainy every day to now we're starting to get into the 90s. So
I'll take the rain. I tell you what, I'm okay with the rain. Got us out of some drought conditions and everything else here. And since half of our water goes west, California, it's nice that we could help them out. But Northern Cal got a ton of moisture too, right? We had lakes
all that snow over the winter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I shouldn't just put all the blame on them, but it was good to get some of those water levels back up because the water tables were getting pretty low in some of the lakes, rivers, barges, you name it. And it's nice to get back up. But now, the thing that now in Colorado is all the mosquitoes have come out to live.
Oh, yeah.
And that I noticed today. I'm not a big fan of that. But, I digress. There's bigger problems in the world.
Exactly.
That's true. But yes, and hopefully all this rain that you guys are receiving means that I don't have to worry about my home state burning up every summer like it's been custom the last 4 or 5 years. So hopefully that'll kind of keep some of those concerns down as we move into what we affectionately call mandatory minicamp, mandatory OTA days, and then training camp.
Boom. But, we do have a very fun show tonight, right? Kevin alluded to it. We've got 2 teams that we're breaking down. We got the Lions. We got the Seahawks. So we're definitely into a lot of fantasy relevant players, a lot of fantasy relevant teams, some teams that'll put up some points. So it'll be a lot of fun to go through that. And then, Alex, we're going to finally get to the question that you have that we've had on the show doc here now for 4 or 5 weeks. And we're going to finally get to answering your question here. So I'm kind of excited for that one as well. Anybody out there, make sure that you're hitting up the socials, Twitter. Wow, that was a little, words are hard. Take 2, live, take 2. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Hit up the socials at Good Old Boys FF. And the best place to support this independent podcast, head over to the YouTubes, youtube.com/@GoodOldBoysFF. Click that subscribe button. Help the boys out there. But
real quickly, before we get going, I was very excited to see our commissioner, our valiant leader of the home league, has reactivated, as if there was ever a question, has reactivated the home league for yet another year. I think I'm going on year 15 in this league, which means you guys are on probably year 18? Something like that?
17, I think.
Year 17?
Yeah, it's been a while.
I think I finally got the invite in 2008. So
yeah, because I think the league started in 06.
There we go. So
yeah, that sounds about right.
So persistence pays off. It has changed platforms, but yet again, we're back for another year, and it'll be another fun one as we follow along through another fantasy football season.
Right, and I'm excited too. We've got some new league rule proposals on the table there, so I'm excited to see how that one kind of comes to fruition and how people vote on that one. And we'll give everybody the updates once those kind of get a little bit further along down there. Also, Alex, just FYI, check your trade.
I've checked it, and I wasn't gonna bring it up, but I'll bring it up if we want to.
I'm willing
maybe
to,
later.
I'm willing to accept a counter. So, alrighty.
Maybe later.
Are we ready to get into some team breakdowns here? Any other thoughts? Any other news we want to hit up?
No. I saw. Okay, hold on. I did see. Let me find it because I didn't click on the. Maybe we don't want to talk about it, but there is some fantasy implications. It looks like Tyreek Hill is having a run-in with the law.
Allegedly.
So something to pay attention to. Should the NFL, even if he doesn't, even if there isn't anything that he is found guilty of in a court of law, the NFL operates independent of courts of law, their code of conduct, their player policy. So it could be, something to keep in mind as you weigh your fantasy future. What will the punishment be for Tyreek Hill? Because as we've seen.
Yeah, I think we're way too early in that one.
I agree with that. I agree. It is probably way too early, but
that means I love me some Jalen Waddle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's
all right.
A bit there.
Since we brought up court of law, what happened with due process? Why are we still waiting on the results of this Alvin Kamara deal?
Because they're still going through it. They haven't had the trial date yet. Obviously, somebody's got some good lawyers to postpone some things and move some things through there. But yeah. Very, very interesting, right? We should finally get some results on that one, on what's ultimately decided here before the season starts, because I believe that goes to trial here late July, early August.
Like Calvin Ridley has been suspended for an entire season, basically, before Alvin Kamara gets his day in court.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah. I did see that the NFL is also, trying to crack down on the player gambling and players placing wages.
Oh, yeah. I saw that they're going to reiterate their gambling policy to players.
Right. So some news coming out there as well. So very
I feel like Derek moved a mile away from his microphone.
Yeah, you wanna speak into that bad boy?
Then we didn't hear you at all.
What? Now your microphone just quit altogether.
Apparently. All right.
There we go.
There we go. That sounds much better.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Much better. Hey, there we go. Sometimes technology is also hard.
It's all good. I'm glad it wasn't just me because I signed on. I was like, Derek, man, I can barely hear you. I'm fiddling here with my headset.
I thought my internet connection was
right.
No, it just turns out technology is hard sometimes. So,
all right, guys, we got a couple great fantasy relevant teams to break down here this evening. So why don't we jump on into it and give the viewers what they tuned in for here?
All righty, heading up the Detroit Lions. 9-8 last season, 55% pass, 45% run ratio, ranked 5th in points for, 3rd in yards for. Head coach Dan Campbell and offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. Let's go ahead and hit up the running back room. Jahmyr Gibbs was kind of a surprising take here on the draft live spectacular we did, but drafted in the first round, pick 12 out of Alabama. Guys, thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs?
Great hands, explosive player. Size-wise is a little bit smaller, but very much built like DeAndre Swift without the injury history, right? I mean, he is going to be used out of the backfield a lot. He's not going to be as productive between the tackles, right? Like you're going to see him get out in space. My guess is they're going to move him around a little bit. You'll see him line up, in special packages in the slot outside, try and create some mismatches and use his route running and footwork to create space and separation. But he is not alone in this backfield, as we will see here momentarily. So while he is a good dynasty asset, normally he's going generally in the top 5, depending on how quarterback needy teams are and whether you're doing single quarterback or super flex. He's going anywhere between 2, 3, and 4 about 90% of the time. So I like Gibbs. I like his hands. He has soft hands. He's able to turn his head around a little bit. I want to see how he holds up in pass pro as a professional now and not just at the University of Alabama, because that will probably determine some of his playing time in certain situations, right? Dan Campbell is he's a hard-nosed guy that the players do rally around, but he doesn't love a lot of mistakes, as most NFL head coaches do not like. Nevertheless, the Lions in general are the darlings of kind of the NFC here at the moment, right? It's the hot team to pick to potentially win that division and get back to the playoffs. They were a game away last year when it was all said and done with, but they ended the season by putting a thumping on the Packers and kind of saying, hey, we're here to stay. So I like this Lions team. I like how Gibbs is used. Generally, I'd like him as a flex in a perfect world. Now, in some leagues, that's just not happening, right? So if you go to, sorry guys, I just had this up. Running back.
I got him as running back 15, 36 ADP.
So
that's third round.
Yep. So the updated underdog best ball rankings have him RB 14. So very close. And going at pick 40.7. So 40-41. So that gets you into the front half of that third round there in 12-team leagues. Most of the time, I'm probably going to be looking at other situations. Travis Etienne's right there. Najee Harris is just in front of him. You kind of switch over and you start looking at the wide receiver position. And you're looking Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy. I understand why Gibbs is kind of a popular pick right there, because you feel like you're breaking a tier at wide receiver, right? So it is a possibility. More often than not, I think I would try and pivot a little bit, because if you wait further down, you can get like a Dameon Pierce who's going to dominate the backfield in Houston. You can wait and get a Madison.
Aaron Jones.
Madison, yeah, Aaron Jones. So there's some other players that I think I like more just because they have developed experience and a sure role in that offense, right? He is a rookie. We're trying to figure how that works out. And right, wrong, or indifferent, if you're looking to go deep in the fantasy playoffs, the rookie wall for running backs is a real thing, guys. Time and time again, we see it. So Gibbs might be a good play. You might like him through the first 8, 9, maybe even 10 weeks of the season. But he is a player based off of history and tendencies that you would want to look to flip right before your trade deadline and acquire an asset who's maybe more on the upswing heading in towards the end of the season than a running back who typically kind of stalls out once they get to weeks 12, 13, 14, and so on, just because the wear and tear in the NFL is so much greater than the college game.
Yeah, and that's kind of the viewpoint that I'm taking with Jahmyr Gibbs is that he is a rookie, right? And he does have an established running back who I'm not sure what they're gonna do with David Montgomery, but he's an established running back in this league, right? So, there is somebody, waiting for him to miss a step, and there is somebody that is going to get some playing time behind him because he has established himself in this league. So I think you're right, Kevin. I think that's the best play that you could do is, get your run out of Jahmyr Gibbs in your redraft league, get your run out of him in the first 10 weeks of the season, and then flip him for a really good asset to somebody that's not paying attention and doesn't understand that the rookie running back wall is a real thing, that there are far fewer exceptions to the rule than there are. So I don't know at that in the fourth round, I'm kind of okay depending on what I've done with my, first 2-3 picks. If I've gone, running back, receiver, and then Jahmyr Gibbs would be a nice complement back, second running back there. I don't know that he finishes where he's being drafted right now at RB15. I feel like that might be a little high, but you never know, with what Detroit does. He is, as you mentioned, Kevin, a really good pass catcher, and he does have the king of the dump off pass playing quarterback, at least for now, there in Detroit. So that could be some more beneficial upside to his value.
So here are the next 6 running backs, according to Underdog, going after Jahmyr Gibbs: Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison.
The only one I would hesitate on is Mixon, just because of some of the off the field and some of the rumblings going on in Cincinnati right now.
Fair enough.
That's the only one that gives me pause on that. But I'd probably rather go every one of those guys you mentioned over Gibbs. And quite frankly, I'd rather have the other running back in this backfield than that.
I wasn't going to spoil that as we were talking about Gibbs. Yes.
And we'll get into David Montgomery here in a little bit, but I would rather have Montgomery over Gibbs this year. I think that the way that this offense is going to work is we're going to see very similar split as to what we saw between Swift and Jamal Williams last year, right? Gibbs will be a guy that they'll get some run, they'll get him out there, they'll get him passing work, they'll find a way to utilize his skill set in this offense. But the 5 zone, the 10 zone work, that's David Montgomery's job. That's and David Montgomery has established himself as a between the tackles thumper that can pick up, fall forward, can get you yards, and has a nose for the end zone, even on a much improved offensive line. So I think there's another running back on this team that I'd rather have over Gibbs. So Gibbs is not going to be a guy that I'm going to be drafting outside of rookie drafts. He's just not.
Right. And I mean, 55 catches, is that kind of the ceiling for Gibbs in this offense, which helps, right? But you need to understand your format, right? 55 catches and half-point PPR doesn't appeal to me very much, right? Especially as you're talking to a guy who you might have to take as your second running back. 55 points in a full point is a little bit more enticing. Like you could feel like you can understand where you're making up ground on some of these running backs. But I very much agree with you, Derek. For this season, his rookie campaign and where he's being drafted, I feel like he's being overdrafted, and there is value if you wait another round or 2 on running back, where you will end up having players in that bracket of 4th and 5th round running backs who finish above Jahmyr Gibbs by the time the season is done and over with. So Gibbs might have the home run play, right? You might have a couple weeks that are great. He's a decent best ball candidate if you're willing to kind of gamble and shake some things up. However, in kind of how we do our standard half-point PPR is kind of where our baseline is, and then we adjust off of that. I'm not going anywhere near him in a half-point this season. I like too many other options later.
Well, and it's funny that you kind of brought up the 55 receptions as kind of the ceiling, right? DeAndre Swift, 48 receptions, 70 targets last year. So the receiving work will be there. The problem is that I don't think that Gibbs is going to get more than probably 100 to – I think he maxes out somewhere about 150 carries, and I don't think that the carries come inside the 20. I think that you see him really in that 20 to 20 type of workload for it. And quite frankly, he's going to be used more out of the backfield as a pass catcher. So wouldn't surprise me if we see him get 100 to 150 carries, call it 55 receptions. I think he puts up maybe 1,000, around 900 to 1,000 total yards between his receiving and his his rushing work. And I think we might see him get 6-7 touchdowns.
I was thinking 5 or 6.
Yeah, I think that's probably the absolute ceiling for him. So he'll do well. He'll get you some good fantasy points, but I think he does not return value to the point where we'll probably see him fringe RB2 closer than we see him fringe RB1, which is where you're drafting him. So I don't see the value there personally.
Cosign, buyer beware.
Like it. All right, let's move on to David Montgomery, who finished running back 23 last year, 201 rush attempts, 801 yards, 5 touchdowns, 34 receptions, 40 targets, 316 through the air, and 1 touchdown. Thoughts on David Montgomery?
I don't know that anybody could have told you that he was 34 of 40 off the top of your head, right? Most people, when they're thinking of David Montgomery, he's not to steal Doug Martin's nickname, but he's kind of just like a muscle hamster, right? Like he was a guy, he runs in between the tackles. He does a decent job when even just in average blocking of being able to get through some arm tackles. He's okay making the first guy miss, but really he's your ground and pound guy. He is going to fill the role that Jamal Williams played last year. Now, I don't know that we're going to see 17 touchdowns, right? I think that's pretty excessive. That was a great season from Jamal Williams. I don't know that David Montgomery quite reaches that on the touchdowns, but he is a better runner than Jamal Williams. He sees holes better. He's a little bit more explosive than Jamal Williams. So I think his total yardage is up there. And with him receiving the ball, he doesn't receive as well as Jahmyr Gibbs, but he does receive the ball well enough that they are not going to be afraid to leave him on the field on third down, especially if Jahmyr Gibbs can't pick up pass pro. And you're going to get some early season run out of David Montgomery. And again, I would pass on Gibbs and take Montgomery later down the line because he's going off the board at
about 68. He's going in the 60s in a lot of drafts.
So the crazy thing is these rankings from Underdog have him at RB 27 and the ADP of 85th.
Yep.
Yes, please sign me up. I will take a guy who does this in an offense that defensively still has some holes, right? Like they're not sound enough defensively that they're going to just put all these teams away. We saw a lot of shootouts with Detroit last year. They were a fun team to watch. They are a gritty team. And in the fourth quarter, when they have a lead, they do want to grind it out, right? That is Dan Campbell football. He wants to bite their kneecaps, right? So I like David Montgomery. I liked him in Chicago. I understand why they brought kind of a younger guy in to fill that Jamal Williams role. And he is a guy that if I'm waiting a 0 RB approach, right, he is a guy I'm looking for in a 0 RB approach because I feel like I can get value out of there because he will finish well above RB 27 by the time the year is all said and done with. I don't think he cracks the top 12, but I think he will probably if we took their draft rankings between Gibbs and David Montgomery. So according to Underdog at 14, the 14th running back and the 27th running back, if you flip them when the season's over, that wouldn't surprise me one bit. And that sounds a lot more accurate than where they're currently going in drafts right now.
I could not agree more with that. I think that David Montgomery, when healthy, I mean, I had this guy on my roster, and there were so many times, not in our home league last year, but there were so many times where he saved my bacon in other leagues that I had. So I appreciate what David Montgomery brings to the table. I like the fact that he's going to be playing in an offense that will still allow him passing work because, again, even if Jared Goff, he was better at throwing the football down the field last year, but still will look for the path of least resistance. And oftentimes that's your running back or your tight end, right? And so that running back option is exciting to me. And I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. I think with where these two guys are going, flip them at the end of the year. And if that draft falls for you and you're able to get David Montgomery with where he's going down there, and what did we say?
Depending upon where you're looking at it, he's either anywhere from about 60 to 85. So it just kind of depends. Like call it 68, 70 kind of as an average.
Yeah. And so if you're able to get that guy at that spot, like what an automatic, just built in value that you already have And you just hope that everybody else in your league isn't paying attention, and they're just looking at draft boards and seeing where people are ranked, because you're going to be able to get a steal there with David Montgomery. In my opinion, I think you get a steal with him because I do think that he is established and brings a lot to this offense. There's a reason why they brought him in, and so I think that that's a big key component to his success this year.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that we see David Montgomery end up with somewhere in the 225 to 250 in total rush attempts there. He's on a much better offensive line than he's ever had in his professional career. So, again, right, and this is one of those that he's averaged 4 to a little over 4 yards per carry as a professional against some behind some bad offensive lines. So there's no reason that I don't see that even ticking up to the point where we could see him get up to like a 4.6, 4.7 yards per carry. And so not going to surprise me when we look up and we see this guy get 12 to 1,300 yards, fall in the end zone, 10 times, even if his passing work comes down a little bit from what it's been the last few years, like we'll see him return value. And it's not going to surprise me to see David Montgomery knocking on the door of RB1. Like I will not be surprised if we look up at the end of the season and he finishes RB 13, 14, 15, and you're talking about a guy that's going to return massive value. I think this is definitely the guy that I want out of Detroit's backfield for running back, and where he's going, tremendous value, tremendous steal there. Any other thoughts on the running backs or David Montgomery?
No, I think that based off of how this Lions offense is going to go, I think that 34, 35, maybe even 40 catches is well within this offensive set, right? Because if we're saying 55 and 40, I mean, there's 95 balls to go around between those two running backs. I think that's well within what's going to happen and what is plausible there. So I'm all about it. Sleeper candidate, right? I mean, if that's what you want to call him, but I do think he is a guy that everyone needs to have flagged and be willing to pull the trigger, even if you feel like it's a round or half a round early, go ahead and get it because the value will still be there if he is going to be coming off the board at RB 24 to 27. You get a whole, tier and a half worth of value built into him because he will finish above that mark.
Absolutely. All righty, let's go ahead and hit up the wide receiver room. Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 8 last year, 106 receptions, 146 targets, 1,160 yards, 9 touchdowns, an average of 9.1 targets per game. Thoughts on Amon-Ra?
This guy's so fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is so fun to watch, and it's just been it's been really cool. And quite frankly, I had the opportunity going into last season to keep him at a bottom basement level price in our home league at 22nd in the 22nd round. I chose to go Cam Akers with that same spot, and Cam Akers kind of dumped all over the bed. Now I drafted Amon-Ra again, but I had to pay a price for it. Right? He jumped up about 15, 16 rounds from that spot where I had to end up drafting him. And he showed out. Wide receiver 8. I think this is about where he finishes again. There might be a little bit of room, but he is not that he's just a volume play, but he's not as explosive as a Tyreek Hill, a Justin Jefferson, a Ja'Marr Chase, even Cooper Kupp, right? And A.J. Brown had some big plays. So I do think that this is where he finishes overall, and I'm okay with that. He is a great wide receiving asset. If you go running back in the first round, follow that up with Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have a nice little tandem there to start. He runs a complete route tree. He does see targets in the red zone, not necessarily. It's hard for him to get targeted as much in the 5, right? Inside the 5, he doesn't see those targets, but 10 and out, he does see a lot of those. So that's kind of his sweet spot, is that 20 to 10 yards out is where you'll see those Amon-Ra St. Brown targets. But once they get inside the 5, those targets disappear a little bit. Part of it's because they start hunting for tight ends and some wide receivers with bigger frames. And part of it is last year the Lions decided to run the ball so much with Jamal Williams that those targets weren't available inside the 5. They played it safe. They wanted to make sure they came away with points. And more often than not, Jamal Williams was able to move that pile. So that's the one downside. But overall, if you're starting a redraft league and Amon-Ra is your number 1 wide receiver going into that, you can feel good about that. It is consistent targets week in and week out. Him and Jared Goff have a really strong, really good connection. And even with all these other pieces, right, with Marvin Jones coming back, with Jahmyr Gibbs coming in, with drafting Sam LaPorta, like there's other weapons around, but I don't think that eats into what Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to do. I think his stat line is going to be very similar this coming season to what it was last year, give or take, the fluctuation and slight fluctuation and mix up between catches, yards, and touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, the 2 years that he's given us, he has been roughly around 100 catches. Big jump up in targets in year 2 from year 1, but we're talking, 120 to 146. Yards went up by about 200 yards. Average was up by about a yard. Touchdowns were roughly the same. So, look at what we see is what we get with Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? The last 2 years, he has been basically at 100 catches, basically at 1,000 yards, basically at 5 touchdowns. That's kind of where they're at. And I have no reason to believe anything is different. In fact, the touchdown number, like you said, Kevin, I think that touchdown number might go up slightly because of the addition by subtraction of losing Jamal Williams. There opens up more opportunity for some of that stuff in the red zone, right? It opens up some more opportunity from the 20 in, from the 10 in for Amon-Ra St. Brown, because you don't have old reliable, who can move the pile and get you some free, some cheap yardage and get you closer to that goal line. So I think there is a little bit where that touchdown number might go up, but I have no reason to believe that he's not going to be flirting around 100 receptions, around 1,000 yards, and maybe, 7 or 8 touchdowns. You add 2 or 3 more to what he gave us last year. And that was good enough for wide receiver 9. So what would make me believe any different? And for the record, Kevin, you had to take a 16-round hit on Amon-Ra St. Brown because you drafted him with the 2nd pick in the 6th round of what would have been a 22nd round draft penalty for keeping him.
At least he paid off.
He did. And can you believe that the 9th wide receiver in the league was still hanging out there, pick number 2 in the 6th round?
Oh, no. And it's on surface level, it sounds good, right? It's just that extra. It's that extra of what could have happened. But, there's still some value there. And he's in play for –
as a keeper again.
Well, as a keeper,
6th
right?
round penalty.
I might go – because I have Jefferson in the 7th, right? So if we go back to the home league, I might just take my 2 wide receivers in the 6th and 7th round, my starting wide receivers, and have Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. At that point, I don't have to ignore the wide receiver position, but as everybody else in the league is chasing their wide receivers, then I get to capture value elsewhere. Yeah. So it's a possibility. Our scoring leads to different formations, and quarterbacks do kind of dominate, so I might have to do something different, but
show does.
At the moment, it is a thought in my mind of just going wide receiver, and then if I need to double tap quarterback in the first 2 rounds, it's not going to kill me.
All righty. So there's a lot of things too that when you look at pairing between quarterback, wide receiver, right? These Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of made for each other, right? How they run, the route tree that Amon-Ra really runs out there in Detroit, and where Jared Goff rolls through. This is not one of those that they pair it very nicely together from the standpoint that Jared Goff still average, air yards per target is still incredibly low. Amon-Ra tends to catch the ball about anywhere from 4 to 6 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then add on, 5 yards of yak onto that thing. So, Kevin made the point earlier that he's not a super explosive guy, but Jared Goff isn't also that guy that's going to force the ball down the field and throw the ball down really throw the ball down the field to it. He's going to dink and dunk, and Amon-Ra kind of fits right into that. And so, Alex, you always make the point that the wide receiver is only as good as the guy throwing on the ball. Like, the guy throwing the ball wants to throw the ball right where Amon-Ra is running, and where Amon-Ra really does a great job running routes and doing that. So you talk about kind of the pairing up of two guys together. Like, this is one of those kind of just match made type of thing. And Amon-Ra will produce value again for you. I think that we'll probably see him finish in that back half RB or wide receiver 1 there. So you're going to have to take him where he's coming off the board, and if you're wanting to return that kind of value there. But I think he'll certainly do it. This is a guy that, not going to surprise when we look up and see 150 plus targets. So he'll be a target monster, target machine this year again, and I think he'll return value for you. All right, let's head over to Jameson Williams. 1 reception, 9 targets, 41 yards, 1 touchdown, an average of 1.5 targets per game last season. And we're going to be missing Jameson Williams for at least 6 games here to start this season off as well. Thoughts on Jameson Williams?
Man, the talent is there, right? We saw the talent in college. We have yet to really see him transfer that to the NFL game. That's how I want to say it, right? So he's coming off the ACL injury, so they really babied him along last year. Shot out of a cannon with that long touchdown, right, in his first game, and then was really quiet kind of for the rest of the season as I'm knocking water bottles off my desk. But I'm shying away. I'm not sure how this is going to look. And I think maybe I should be more excited about his potential. But Jared Goff is relatively cautious, right, when taking some deep shots. He did expand that a little bit last year and took a few more. But Jameson Williams is, at best, the second receiving option on this team. At worst, he's the 4th, right? Like, there's a big fluctuation there in kind of how he fits in. Is he going to be up to speed being suspended 6 games? Is he going to be on top of the playbook? Is he going to stay conditioned the way that he needs to be come week 7? Is that rapport going to be there with Jared Goff? There's a lot more questions than answers with this player. So generally speaking, I am not going to be looking to kind of reach out and I guess stick my neck out for this one just yet. And, he is kind of in no man's land for wide receivers, which helps, right? So you have Brandon Cooks, Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, Juju Smith-Schuster, Al Lazard, Odell Beckham. Like, it's kind of in that range. And I think that generally that fits, right? You're going a little bit later. He's coming off at wide receiver 49, which might be about right at the end of the season. But at the same time, with missing those 6 games, I don't think he's going to finish at 49. He might be 49 from week 7 through the rest of the season. But by missing those 6 games and having to take up a roster spot, a valuable roster spot in short bench leagues, I am going to be pivoting and looking at other options, whether it's tight end, maybe I take a quarterback in that for single quarterback leagues, something in that range when we're talking about 96th, 97th overall. I understand the gamble. If you're going for high ceiling play, if you feel like you're really confident and you're just looking for a shot out of a cannon, this is a prime candidate to do that with. He has blazing speed. He tracks the ball well. He is able to run most of the route tree. I still think there's some development that needs to go on there, but that comes with time and him actually being able to stay on the field for one reason or the other. So for all that, he's a nice depth piece if you are really sure about the top end of your wide receiver core and just hoping for a splash. But if you wait on wide receiver for whatever reason, if you load up and go double RB and now you're kind of chasing receivers through, I need an option that's going to be there for me week in and week out, not just a high ceiling play with a really low floor downside.
So best ball candidate, right? Like that's where we see Jameson Williams week in, week out. Not the guy. And honestly, that 6-week suspension doesn't do anything for me. Again, like Kevin said, taking up a roster spot. So he is not somebody that I will look at drafting. And I have a feeling that he maybe hanging out there in waivers because a frustrated owner come week 3 who needs somebody that can participate, drops him on the waiver wire. And then maybe then I look at him, as a nice little depth piece. But realistically, to spend a draft pick on a guy who's going to miss the first 6 weeks, who isn't that much of an impactful player, doesn't have much to show for what he can do in the league, is not something I'm particularly interested in. So I'm not going to draft Jameson Williams. I'll pay attention to who has him. And then if, he ends up on the waiver wire, maybe I'll snag him at week 5, week 6 to see what you can get out of him. But he's not worth a draft pick, in my opinion.
Cosign. Yeah, I'm not looking to draft Jameson Williams. Best ball would be the only format that I would rock and roll that one. Season long redraft. Nope, he's staying out there. I'll let somebody else deal with that first 6 games. And you're right. There's a good chance to come week 3, week 4. You can pick him up off the waiver wires if you really want to go that route. But this is a guy that I will not be adding on in come redraft season. Let's go ahead and hit up Marvin Jones here, coming over in the offseason, back to Detroit, finished wide receiver 57, 46 targets, 81 yards, 529 in the yards, 3 touchdowns, average of 5.1 targets per game. Thoughts on Marvin Jones?
I think he's a wide receiver 3, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him finish just inside the top 40 by the time the season's said and done with. He is going to be the beneficiary of Amon-Ra St. Brown and coverage continuing to kind of get shifted over a little bit. So more often than not, Marvin Jones is going to see a little bit of off coverage. He's a little bit taller, right? So he's able to be a red zone presence. And the dude is a consummate professional, right? He runs solid routes. He understands what his assignment is on every single play. He will chip in when run blocking. Like, he fits what Dan Campbell wants after, leaving the Lions and now coming back. But I think that he's a piece that, again, he's a depth piece for wide receiver. I wouldn't call him a handcuff necessarily, but I do think he's a guy that warrants being drafted, anywhere between wide receiver 50 and 55. I think so. There's a little bit of value there, injury potential elsewhere on the team that leads to a bigger target share. So there's a little bit of upside to kind of keep an eye out of. But when you get down into that range of wide receiver, you're looking for a break, right? Like, there's not necessarily a clear splash candidate that's coming out in this area. So you're looking for some sort of break. And with this particular team and situation, you're hoping that the Lions defense is not quite up to snuff yet, and the Lions are forced to chase points, right? That's where his value is going to come in, is being a good secondary target for Jared Goff and helping move the chains down the field when they decide to bracket cover St. Brown.
Yeah. What I'm seeing here, he's basically going undrafted, right? That's kind of where we're at here. So yeah, I think he's going undrafted, which means, you can build that out or take a last round flyer on him and then hope for that benefit. But I agree with you, Kevin. I think you're going to get your return and you don't need to spend a ton of capital on it. Maybe a last round pick, maybe a waiver wire after the first week, whatever. But that's where I see him, what his value is to me as a fantasy owner is, maybe something happens and then he gets a little bit more chunk of the play, but a little more chunk of the offense. But he's not, he's a very, very late round draft, if at all. That's one.
Yep, that was one. All right, so that's kind of where I see him as well, Alex. Like he's a guy that in most of the cases is coming off the board in like the 250. So not going to be drafted in most of your leagues out there. He could be a potential spot start, potential depth piece for you, but this isn't a guy that you need to go out and spend much draft capital on. Some best ball potential there as well. Marvin Jones usually, seems to always find that 1 or 2 games a season where he shows up for fantasy and in a best ball format. He'll do all right on that one for you. All righty, let's hit up Brock Wright, tight end 38, 18 receptions, 24 targets, 216 for yards, 4 touchdowns, 1.7 targets per game. Thoughts on Brock Wright?
Really got his boost right after the trade deadline, right? TJ Hockenson got shipped off to Minnesota, and then everybody's kind of scrambling. All right, what's Detroit going to do at tight end? Insert Brock Wright. Ends up with those 4 touchdowns, used much more in the red zone than any other part of the field. But I think that you're going to see more of that. I think that because of the overall lack of size that Detroit has in the in the wide receiver room, I think that they're going to be using a lot of 2 tight end sets, show some power formation with David Montgomery. And between Brock Wright and Sam LaPorta, you're going to see quite a few red zone targets, mismatches on safeties, that type of thing. Overall, it's a tight end. It's a tight end 2 play, right? Like he might get up to, tight end 32, 30 by the time the season is all said and done with. So really closer to a tight end 2, tight end 3 flex play. So it's going to be hard. He's not a guy that I'm going to be looking to draft. He's going to vulture touchdowns away from Sam LaPorta and David Montgomery. Honestly, like that's where he's going to be more of a thorn in your side than a true fantasy asset. But nevertheless, he fits the bill for Dan Campbell. He's a decent blocker. He's big body in the red zone to give Jared Goff, a good big set of numbers to kind of look at there in the middle of traffic. And he's going to vulture some touchdowns. So late in a best ball, maybe you take a flyer on him just to see if you can get a game where he has 5 catches for, 45 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? And just kind of see if you sneak him up into your roster that way. But overall, he's not going to have the week in and week out performances necessary to be on a fantasy roster.
Everything Kevin just said. Not a guy I'm targeting, and I just hope that he doesn't vulture away if I get Montgomery on my roster.
Yeah, this is a touchdown dependent tight end, just like most of them are, and I'm not looking to draft him, not even as really a depth piece on there. So I'm going to just be passing on Brock Wright here. All right, let's go ahead and hit up Sam LaPorta. So Sam LaPorta, the rookie drafted in the 2nd round, pick 34 out of Iowa. Thoughts on Sam LaPorta?
So LaPorta is interesting, right? Like the fit for Detroit seems to make sense, but when you compare him to TJ Hockenson, because that's who just left town, right? He's a little bit smaller. He doesn't block quite as well, and he doesn't receive quite as well, right? So it's like TJ Hockenson light. I think that as a fantasy community, we're so starved for competent tight end play that we're probably overdrafting him a little bit in redraft leagues. He's another guy that he's outside of tight end 1, right? Like at best, I think he finishes tight end 22. Like I just don't see it happening as a rookie. They're a little bit slower to develop in general, and there's going to be some balls being scattered around there in Detroit to where LaPorta, maybe a bye week fill-in if he hits the right matchup. But overall, I am not thinking that he is going to be a weekly starter there.
Where did you pull that number from, Kevin?
Which number?
Tight end 22.
It was just I was flying through rankings in the top of my head, and I didn't think he was going to finish in tight end 3 territory. Why?
That's hilarious because that's the ADP that I see for him is 22. So his tight end 22. which is really funny. He's right there with another rookie.
My
Michael
phone's
Mayer.
off. I wasn't looking down.
I know. That's why I was wondering where you pulled that from. Yeah, I think we all agree. We've kind of said on this show before, tight ends really find their way year 3, year 4. So in a dynasty format, he's a great stash, and hope that he develops. But, in redraft this year, unless you're in a tight end premium or in some weird 2 tight end league, I don't know that he's really anybody that you need to worry about year 1. But he could have a little bit of an impact. I just think that there are other options available to Jared Goff that are just as adequate, and you won't really have to go through the growing pains of figuring things out with a new tight end. So I think that's what is going to hold LaPorta back this year. But excited to see if he can develop into something in the future.
And I think both you gentlemen have made all the good points. So let's just go ahead and head on into Jared Goff, who finished QB 10 last year, 382 completions, 587 attempts, 65% completion percentage, 4,438 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 29 rush attempts on 73 yards. Thoughts on Jared Goff?
I'm going to be very interested to see when the season's said and done with if he matches or can eclipse this 29 touchdowns that he threw for last year. He was kind of a darling, right? He went super late. If you waited on quarterback and you took him in a lot of cases in single leagues as your second quarterback, late round flyer, whatever, he's a guy in case my guy gets injured. And in a lot of cases, he played better, right? Had a 4-game stint kind of in the middle of the season, where 4 out of this 5 weeks there and right in the middle, he kind of suffered a little bit. But man, oh man, he was so strong down the stretch, and he was a viable and extremely viable quarterback throughout your fantasy playoffs. So I don't know that I'd be surprised if somewhere in that 10 to 13 range for quarterbacks by the time the season's said and done with, and you're getting them at a deeper discount than that. So if you're waiting on quarterback a little bit, Jared Goff's not a bad option. They're going to throw the ball. They're not going to be able to put teams away. So because of that, knowing that he's always going to be having the threat of throwing, I like him. He's a guy who puts up points for all 4 quarters. He's confident in this system. He knows that he has Hendon Hooker sitting behind him. And yes, it's a developmental year for Hendon Hooker, but Goff's a professional, right? He wants to play and kind of earn his chops and get that other extension to play well into his 30s. And this is an opportunity for him to do so, because if he matches his output from last year, the Lions aren't going to have a choice. They're going to just run with Goff and see that he is the quarterback for the now. Maybe not long-term future, but for the now, and get him through the next 3-4 seasons as they develop the rest of the team around him. So I'm okay with Jared Goff, especially where he's going. I don't have to spend early capital on Patrick Mahomes as much as it's great, right? But if I'm able to capture value in other places, it makes up for that point differential. And right now, Jared Goff's going, according to Underdog, he's going at QB 17 at 128th overall. Sign me up.
Yeah.
And
he's kind of that.
And beginning of round 11, sign me up. If that's where your starting quarterback is, and he is able to mirror for the most part what he does last year, there you go. Significant value, if nothing else, because of ADP, let alone the fact that you draft him at 17 and he has the potential to finish top 10 again.
And he's kind of that the new, or I guess another version of Kirk Cousins, right? Always there at the end of the year, puts up stats, right? And is able to get you fantasy points, right? That's what we kind of, it's not exactly the sexiest name out there. Not exactly. He doesn't do it, with his feet and, making these incredible throws and outside of the pocket, all that jazz. he just gets it done, right? And so that's the big thing about Jared Goff is like you don't have to worry about how he gets it done. He just gets it done. And hilariously, you were talking about it, Kevin, about how Hendon Hooker's behind him. First off, before I get into this tangent, I'm all for Jared Goff. I would love to have him as a QB2 in my in our league. I just think that he would be reliable. If you have a 2 QB league and you go, with say an Anthony Richardson, right? If you go with something that is a little bit more of a risk reward factor, then you can kind of have that reliability factor there with Jared Goff, and you can take your lumps with an Anthony Richardson, who goes through his growing pains as a rookie, because that you have old reliable back there with Jared Goff that it's not going to be a throwaway week completely with 2 quarterbacks. So that's kind of where I would see that. And he does have Hendon Hooker back there behind him. Jared Goff is now entering his 8th NFL season. He is now just 3 years older than his backup, who is a rookie.
It's always kind of crazy when you start diving into those
with the Hendon Hooker stuff, right? Yeah.
Right. And the good thing, Goff did not play particularly well against the Packers last season, right? And the Packers secondary is pretty stinking good. He's done with the Packers before your playoffs hit. He plays them in week 4 and week 12. So Goff is done. He does not face that. And getting down to it, we start looking at playoff schedule. At Chicago, home against the Vikings, at Minnesota, at the Cowboys. That's his playoff schedule. The Broncos might prove to, again, be tough against the pass. But overall, it's a manageable playoff schedule. And that matchup against the Bears and the Vikings, honestly, those are juicy. Those are juicy matchups. So a little bit tougher this year. They got to play at Tampa Bay and at Baltimore back-to-back weeks. So he might struggle some, again, in the middle of the season. But I do think overall they're still going to let him rip, and they're not going to shy away from letting Goff throw the ball, 580 to 600 times this year.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good number for him is kind of in that, 570, 580 type of range. Again, right, I think this is another one of those that we see him get 4,300 yards when it's all said and done. Not going to surprise me to see him be up in the upper 20s for passing touchdowns, like 26, 27, call it, 10, 11 interceptions. So I think that you'll get a very, very similar output from Jared Goff to the point where he's going to be the back end QB1 when it's all said and done. You can get him for, mid QB draft capital. Sign me up. Let's go. I am a big fan of where he's coming off the board and would love to have him as QB2 on any of my Superflex teams, and would love to have him even as QB1 on a lot of single QB leagues there. So, all right, any other thoughts here on the Lions or Jared Goff?
No, sir. We can move on.
Very, very good. All righty, let's go ahead and hit up the Seattle Seahawks. 9-8 last year, 57% pass, 43% run. They ranked 9th in points for, 12th in yards for, and Pete Carroll, head coach, Shane Waldron, offensive coordinator. Let's go ahead and head to the running back room here. Kenneth Walker in his rookie season was RB16, 228 rush attempts, 1,050 yards, 9 touchdowns, 27 receptions, 35 targets, 165 yards. Thoughts on Kenneth Walker?
Man, Kenneth Walker's a tough one for me this year, right? I was not expecting Zach Charbonnet to be drafted by Seattle, and it really kind of threw a wrench into a few things for me. But I think Pete Carroll's kind of going into, 2 is better than 1, right? Like he had Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. Both of them got dinged up and in and out of the lineup. Kenneth Walker fought through a little bit of injury issue as he was wearing down towards the end of the season. Is that right? Am I thinking? Sorry, hold on.
He was more banged up towards the beginning of the season.
There we go.
And then Rashad
really
Penny
got
Rashad Penny got banged up towards the back half. So it was kind of they swapped almost in the middle of the season.
There we go. Thank you.
And Walker I mean, even though we had the rookie wall, he was out. I mean, he wasn't really participating the first 5-6 weeks. So it was like he played a college schedule.
Yeah. So now when he's good, right? It was the boom place, right? He stuffed up, and then he'd break one for 45 and have a great fantasy day. But when you break it down, it was like 3.4 yards per carry. Like he was not overly efficient in running the football, but he had enough monster plays that kind of balanced that out. You can't bank on these big gashing runs from running backs anymore, right? Like it's hard to predict. He had some last year. He might have one or two more again this year. It's entirely plausible. But when you're looking at how the consistency of a player rolls out, I don't know that I'm going after Walker this season, guys. Like, I just think there's too many questions in what Pete Carroll wants to do there in Seattle. I know he likes to run the football. He's going to bring a second guy in to try and keep both of them fresh. But who's going to truly dominate when it gets down to it? Charbonnet receives the ball a little bit better than Kenneth Walker does, so that worries me a little bit on third down. I think it's another situation. There's more questions than answers, and where Kenneth Walker is going in drafts, I feel like I would rather go Jones. J.K. Dobbins is a guy that I would rather have over Kenneth Walker. And I think Miles Sanders too. Like some guys who are going just after him, I think I would like all three of those guys on my roster over Kenneth Walker, just as consistency goes. But for what it's worth, I would take Walker over Gibbs. Like, I think the consistent running volume I like over Gibbs. Both have kind of explosive play potential, but when you're being handed the ball and you know your number's being called, I take a little bit more solace in that than, hey, we're going to try and set you up for a pass play, but if that linebacker reads this right and cheats out into the flat, we're going to have to go somewhere else, right? And it's a lost target, even though the play might have been drawn up for you. So it's interesting, but I think Walker's a solid 17, 18 by the time the season's done with, just because I think he loses a little bit of volume. He might finish a touch higher than that if he can play a full season. So well within that RB2 category, right about where he's being drafted, right? He's being taken RB15 according to Underdog. So it's right about where his value is. I just feel like I get a little bit better value down the board than what I do with Kenneth Walker.
So I was on the Kenneth Walker train in the home league last year. And I have a decision to make, right? I spent a 7th round draft pick on him. And as I think at least Kevin thinks, and Derek, I'm sure you probably agree with this, he's going to return better than 7th round value. And so, like, do I take the penalty on it? But that Zach Charbonnet pick in the 2nd round this year kind of makes that a tougher decision to make, right? Like, it definitely gives me pause. I agree. I think he is going to be the air quotes lead back there in Seattle, because, you know, the Rashad Penny's gone. Like, he is listed number 1 on the depth chart now. There's Kenny McIntosh is in town. DJ Dallas. We'll talk about, you know, these other guys too, but you know, how much run does that allow him? How much run does that get him? You know, the offense has also brought in some other pieces that will be, you know, some shiny new toys for Pete Carroll and company to play with. So I don't know. It is a tough situation. I do think, again, he finishes RB2 comfortably in RB2. But there is pause because of that damn 2nd round pick that they made this year. I would have been a hell of a lot more comfortable had they not done that.
Oh yeah. If they don't take Charbonnet, you're talking about Kenneth Walker being a top 10 back, right?
Easily,
like
right?
It fully elevates him up into that top 10 echelon. And you're looking at him over the likes of Josh Jacobs, rivaling Breece Hall, Najee Harris, and in that area. And Charbonnet does disrupt that. And it's something that people are going to have to make a decision on. And quite frankly, Charbonnet is going late enough that you could stack them, because Charbonnet is going to RB 32, which honestly probably is about right. We'll touch on him here in a bit, but there's enough of a gap that you could take him, in the 9th to 10th round, if that's what you want to kind of handcuff that Seattle backfield. But then you're playing whose week is it type deal, right? Because if you miss that Charbonnet week, you're going to kick yourself, because I would all but guarantee he's going to have a monster week earlier on in the season than not, and people are going to flood towards him thinking that he's going to kind of dominate something as far as a target share or snap count in the backfield. And I still think he gets edged out by Walker just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for as much as the narrative is that Seattle likes to run the ball, and that's Pete Carroll's kind of MO, and all of this and all of that, they were 22nd in the league last year in total run plays. So there is something to be said on that one, that there may not necessarily be enough run game to go around to fully support both of these running backs. I do think that we do see these guys fully kind of cannibalize each other. Even though the fact that Carroll seemingly likes to do this, we saw this kind of similarly play out where they had a very productive back with Chris Carson. They went out and spent a first round draft capital on Rashad Penny and brought him in, and we now see back-to-back years where they spend a second round pick on a running back and a very highly touted kind of running back coming out of college. So I don't know that this is one of those that either one of these guys ultimately. I think Charbonnet's going late enough that you can potentially return value, but Kenneth Walker, right? And depending upon where you look at it, because you're right, Kevin, like Underdog has him going much later, but there's a lot of other kind of best ball sites out there that his overall kind of average ADP comes out to be 28. So you're talking third round type of pick there. RB11 kind of on average there. And that's way too rich for what I think Kenneth Walker is going to do, because I think we're going to see somewhat similar as far as that goes, right? Somewhere between the 200, 220 carries when it's all said and done, probably around 1,000 yards, maybe get 7-8 touchdowns on the ground. I think that some of that passing work goes to Charbonnet there. So I think that we probably see him finish in a mid RB2 territory on that one as well. So overall, where he's coming off the board, I think you're going to struggle to get him to return draft capital value for where you're going to have to take him. So on that note, other guys I'd rather go with. Let's go ahead and hit up Zach Charbonnet, the rookie, drafted in the second round, pick 52 out of UCLA. Thoughts on Zach Charbonnet?
It's kind of touching on that a little bit, right? Kind of going that RB 30 to 35 range, has the potential to return a little bit of value there, although I don't think it's nearly as much as some others in that area, because when you start looking around Charbonnet, and my damn phone shut off. Here we go. Alvin Kamara in a lot of formats, right? Because of this legal situation. But if they get that cleared up, AJ Dillon, Samaje Perine. So Samaje Perine is going to get a lot of run in Denver. Like, even with Javonte Williams coming back, they're going to kind of baby that along, especially the first half of the season, to make sure that Javonte's up to snuff and up to speed. I would much rather have Samaje Perine on my roster than Zach Charbonnet. A guy that we talked about last week, Antonio Gibson. I like the potential of Antonio Gibson and what they're going to do with getting him the ball out of the backfield in Washington a little bit more than like Zach Charbonnet. So there's decisions to be made, but nonetheless, once again, if you look just a little bit further down the roster or down the draft board, I find guys that I like more. Rashad Penny is
Jamal
a guy
Williams.
is another one. Jamal Williams, Damian Harris. No one talks about Damian Harris because he went to Buffalo to quote unquote die, but between him and James Cook, I like their abilities to split that backfield and be just as, if not more relevant for Buffalo than Charbonnet is going to be in Seattle. So just some other guys kind of in that range, or if you want to pass on him, go a different position and then come back to running back the next round, those are guys to kind of take a look at. So I like clear path to volume, right? I like clear path to volume. We're not sure who's going to be catching the ball out of the backfield. Geno Smith doesn't dump the ball out a whole bunch, right? He will sprinkle it to the tight ends, but this new three-headed wide receiver group that they have in Seattle, Geno's going to be maybe not air raid driving the ball down the field, but it's the route combinations. It's the 5-yard outs and the 7-yard ins and that type of thing that they're not going to have running backs run, but Geno will stare down or stand in the pocket and stare down a pass rusher to get the ball to Lockett or DK or possibly JSN once we kind of have a better understanding for what his role is going to be this coming season.
Yeah, and that point actually kind of, makes me think that the running backs will have maybe somewhat of an increased role in this offense in the pass catching, because defenses are going to have to, pay attention to what is going on with DK, with Lockett, with JSN, if he emerges as a bona fide pass catcher in this offense, which then leads, to those soft areas, right? Those soft spots between the linebackers and the line that will tend to open up because those linebackers will be sagging back a little bit to help in the secondary, or you get the safeties, preoccupied that they won't be able to come and pick up that running back coming out of the backfield. So that's a point that makes me think that the running backs will be a little bit more involved. Which has nothing to do with Zach Charbonnet, because I'm not sure if he's going to be used in the passing game, right? Like, will he be able to pick up pass pro, right? As rookies, it's tough. So I do think that Kenneth Walker is like the clear number one back here. And I can see a way where, Zach Charbonnet does see some playing time, and, and I think that his best option is if, knock on wood, Kenneth Walker gets hurt, Zach Charbonnet all of a sudden becomes a lot more valuable. But maybe this is just me as a current Kenneth Walker owner trying to not speak it into existence, because I really don't want Zach Charbonnet to be a thorn in Kenneth Walker's side when it comes to fantasy production, because I need Kenneth Walker to be good this year. So I think I'm coming at it. I've got my biased glasses on looking at this, but if nothing else, like, I don't want to say that he's like a true handcuff, because I don't think he will be, but it would be a good idea if you are Kenneth Walker, and with where they're going, right, where you can potentially get them at not a super high cost. If you are a Kenneth Walker, owner, that Zach Charbonnet should be on your list of when is he about to hear his name called, and should you react to that?
Yeah, it's not going to surprise me if you see this thing, kind of be almost a 55-45 type of split when it's all said and done. Like, these guys here, I think will ultimately kind of cannibalize into each other. And even if, you're talking about Seattle potentially having the running backs being more involved in the passing game, things like that, these guys weren't overly targeting the wide receivers or the running backs last year, right? 84 total targets all year long. So there's not a ton of those things to go around. And even if you increase that, you'd have to increase that significantly for it to really play out to any standalone value, or one of these running backs to take pretty much all of that work for it to, equate to fantasy volume and fantasy points to it. So as much as I like the player Charbonnet, as much as I like the player Kenneth Walker, I'm going to have a hard time staring down on the draft board and pulling the trigger on that when there's other guys in that same range that I'd rather go with, and I think will return better value. All righty, let's go ahead and hit up wide receivers. DK Metcalf finished wide receiver 18, 90 receptions, 141 targets, 1,048 yards, 6 touchdowns, an average of 8.3 targets per game. Thoughts on DK Metcalf?
How this guy doesn't have over 100 catches each year is beyond me. And yes, they spread it out a little bit, but he just completely disappears from the game plan at times, and I don't understand it. I know that at times, if he doesn't get involved, he what's the word I want to look for lack of a better term, he almost goes diva wide receiver a little bit, right? He kind of pouts on the sideline, maybe has a boneheaded holding penalty or takes a personal conduct foul and does some weird things like that. Because there were times last year where, Pete Carroll and everyone else is chasing DK down the sideline saying, hey, we need you. Like, we need your head back in this. And he's up in arms about something. That being said, he's not a bad wide receiver 2 to have, but he is not a wide receiver 1. Like, he's just not that guy. Athletically, he's able to. And in, peak weeks, yes, he will jump into that territory, but there are also weeks where DK is going to disappear and leave a big hole in your lineup. So as much as I like the guy, I like the player, I don't love having him on a bunch of fantasy rosters, just because if I get burned, I don't want to get burned all over the place at once. That being said, massive body, freak speed, can still create separation. It's just it's the mental concentration that you need just a little bit more out of DK to kind of take that next step, because he should be in the same conversation as probably AJ Brown and Cooper Kupp, maybe Tyreek Hill, like that notch just below Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. DK has the athletic ability to be in that next group down. But instead, we're talking about him behind guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but also Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith and, some of these other guys. We're taking him behind those guys because you can't trust the consistent output from DK.
Yeah, and when you look at his his stats from last year, he was targeted double-digit times, so 10 or more targets only 5 times last year, which is 10 or more targets is a lot when you're considering what Seattle does offensively. But you're talking about the volume. He was up near 10 targets most of the rest of the games. But to your point, Kevin, there are weeks where he is just going to disappear and he's not going to be fantasy relevant. I mean, even on days or weeks where he has, a good catch to target ratio, some of those are still for, his first week was 7 catches on 7 targets for just 36 yards, right? Like that's his next week, 4 catches on 6 targets for 35 yards. And like, that's what you're going to have to get when you get DK Metcalf. And I just think that's partially a product of the guy who's lining up on the opposite side of him, who is also a viable, receiving candidate, and B, the type of offense that Seattle likes to run. They do run the football. They do play in, some lower scoring games. Historically, they've played in, some would say, defensive battles. Certainly not the case last year, but they do play in a really difficult defensive division, right? So those division opponents are not friendly to receivers, and those are the teams that you play the most. So I think the big thing with DK is that we don't overvalue him, right? And with where he's going, I feel like it might be, it's right, but I think it's right at the high end of where you're going to get that return on investment, right? So if he's going 15th, like 15 feels like the highest that he's going to finish, right there at that top end of wide receiver 2. And Kevin, you are correct. Like, physically, this guy should be, somebody who should be up there in that second tier of receiver, but he's just not there. And looking at their schedule again this year, they've drawn the AFC, was that North? Yeah. And so you've got more really good defensive teams that they're going to line up against this year. So this is a difficult schedule for Seattle receivers. I still think he has enough to get his, right? Like, I still think that he can do what he needs to do, but it's going to be a tough year. He's going up against some really tough defenses. There's 2 other receiving, 2 other guys that are going to be options for Geno Smith, not to mention, the running game. So wide receiver 2 feels like a lot, and don't overspend on DK Metcalf, because you're just going to be frustrated with the return that you get.
Yeah. Yeah, you certainly will. And yeah, it's interesting, right? When you talked about some of those game finishes, right? Week 1, week 2, where you 7 targets, 6 targets, like certainly seeing volume coming his way. The weekly finish was wide receiver 64 in week 1, wide receiver 64 in week 2. So even with volume, it doesn't necessarily translate to fantasy output at all, right? And then when you look at it too, for as much of a physical specimen as DK Metcalf truly is, not a guy that really is getting out of tackles, breaking tackles, running away from guys, things like that. Like this is a guy that gets about 2.4 yards after the catch when it's all said and done. So like this is a guy that basically when he catches it, he's going down. And yeah, it's also interesting too when you look at some of these other things, right? Like, you know, so we're all Denver fans, and the knock on Jerry Jeudy for the last couple of seasons was he has a hard time catching the ball, has a case of the dropsies. We've hear that kind of thing all around. And the reason I bring Jerry Jeudy up is he and DK finished very similar last year. DK had more drops than Jerry Jeudy had last year. Like it is one of those that right now, the way that comes to play, you're going to most likely be frustrated if you're a DK Metcalf manager this year. This is a guy that I'm not going to be looking to put on my team simply from the standpoint that the draft capital, you're going to have a hard time recouping on that. And moreover, you're going to be frustrated is probably the best way to word that when you're having to try and figure that out, because if he's in there as your flex, okay, fine. Right. But if you need him on a wide receiver 2 and to be a consistent wide receiver 2 for you, you are going to get such up and down weeks that it is going to drive you nuts, because you're right. He can go out there and deliver you, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 10. He can deliver you a top 10 week and deliver you one of those week winning type of performances, but he can also go out there and just disappear on you and give you wide receiver 105 on the week and lose you a game, right? So this is one of those that I am proceeding with caution on that one, and it's really going to have to kind of fall to me in the right place for me to draft DK Metcalf this year. All right, let's hit up Tyler Lockett, who finished wide receiver 13, 84 receptions, 117 targets, 1,033 yards, 9 touchdowns, average of 7.3 targets per game. Thoughts on Tyler Lockett?
Tyler, man, I personally am not the world's biggest Tyler Lockett fan. However, Tyler Lockett consistently does a bit better job than DK for Geno Smith. We saw it 2 years ago when Geno filled in for Russell Wilson, and then we saw it last year for an entire season, right? Tyler Lockett finished 3 spots above DK. He just has a sneaky way of getting open. He seems to come down with those deep passes a little bit better than DK does for whatever reason. The concentration seems to be there. And so for that, I can't hate on the guy where he's going, right? You're getting some value from where Tyler Lockett's being drafted. He's going to be used in this offense as they're passing in this division. He's the closest thing to a security blanket that I think Geno Smith has. So for this year, I think Lockett's still the guy. Like I think I like Lockett end of year over DK a little bit. And last year I wasn't willing to say that. This year I am. So JSN, maybe the slot, maybe he's Lockett's replacement, in 2 years when Lockett's contract is up and they develop him. But for now, Lockett's arguably, and really not even arguably, Lockett is going to be the 1A for this passing offense in Seattle. So I'm okay with him as a wide receiver 2. If you can get him as a flex, it's even better depending on kind of where that's going. A lot of people forget about Lockett, so that's where some of that built-in value is. So there's some potential there for value, and overall, I think you're going to be very happy with the consistency of Lockett. It's not just deep balls and expecting him to run under a 35, 40-yard pass.
Was there somebody now they might have been about a year ahead of where they should have been with this rant that they went on, but I recall somebody making the case that Tyler Lockett was better than DK Metcalf. And I recall his two co-hosts on that show shooting down his theory.
He's
And
not
now
better.
here we are,
he's just more productive.
3 seasons later.
He's
Tyler
not
Lockett
better.
is the man.
He's not better. He's more productive. There is a difference.
Better. He's better for you in fantasy. And so Tyler,
you know what
Lockett,
they say about the blind
to
squirrel,
me,
right?
He was. What was my hero? My hero from Atlanta. I can't even remember the man's name now. My hero shine call.
Well, it was
from
Arizona,
last
but
year.
it was Greg Dortch.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was Greg Dortch. Thank you. I had to get there. I said Atlanta. I meant Arizona. Yeah, but look, like Tyler Lockett has proven to be, Geno's preferred receiver. And I think he does benefit from the fact that DK Metcalf does line up on the other side, and defenses need to be aware of where DK Metcalf is because you don't want to get beat by DK Metcalf. And Tyler Lockett benefits from that. When I made the case that Tyler Lockett was the better receiver out of him and DK Metcalf, that was still when Russ was there. And obviously Russ could support, those two guys. And when you broke it down statistically, they were pretty much similar. There was very little difference in what they did. And I think DK was a touch better when I had broken down those stats. But I mean, when Geno is under center, like Tyler Lockett becomes kind of his guy. So as far as, where he is being taken and with the return that you're going to get over where DK Metcalf is, like I'm much more comfortable taking Tyler Lockett than I am DK Metcalf because the return on investment will be higher. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
I like it. I do happen to recall that rant that you went on 3 years ago when you were saying that going into that. And I do remember that the season directly following that, DK actually finished one spot ahead of Tyler. Just throwing that out there. But
and then what happened? I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I like it. No, you make some great points there, right? Tyler Lockett, very efficient for fantasy and does a really good job for your fantasy roster. And where he's coming off the board, yes, he can certainly be a value for you. But this is one of those that
maybe it's just because of expectations, right? Maybe it's just because, sorry to interrupt you, Derek, but
No,
maybe it's
good.
just because of expectations, right? Like DK Metcalf is a second round pick, right? Or a third round pick. And Tyler Lockett is not a second or a third round pick. So you don't have the expectation. So it is that bonus built in of where you drafted him versus the production you're getting out of him. Right, wrong, or indifferent about, where you're getting DK. But that is a big thing. Perception is huge. And when you put certain pressures on guys that you draft early, and when you don't, you feel like you've kind of won the lottery because you've gotten more than what you invested into, another guy. So that I think there is a little bit of that in terms of Tyler Lockett's perceived value.
Well, and really the big difference between these two guys last year was the 3 touchdowns. It was really what separated them out in points and was really the difference in the 5 ranking spots there when it's all said and done. Because receptions really not that different, total yards really not that different. 3 touchdowns make your difference of about the 14 total fantasy points that separated these two out. But you're right, when you're taking DK Metcalf in the 2nd, 3rd round type of thing, and a guy that you were able to take in the 5th, 6th, 7th round outperforms him or performs very similarly to him, you're right. There is that perception that comes into play, and there is some of that plays out there. But it's not going to surprise me when we look up this season and Tyler Lockett picks up his 5th straight season of 1,000 yards, somewhere in the 70 to 80 receptions range, and gets 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. Like, I think that he will return some tremendous value for you on your fantasy roster, especially from the standpoint that he is a very reliable kind of Lockett loaded wide receiver 2 for fantasy. And you have to spend 6th-round capital on him. So will certainly return some value, and I think he'll do very well for your fantasy roster. There is one of those that I'm gonna have some debates when I get down in there in kind of that that 6th, 7th round on where I'm gonna go there, because there's a lot of guys that I really like the value in that 6th to 7th round on that. So tremendous value down there. All right, let's go ahead and hit up the next wide receiver here, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, drafted in the 1st round, pick 20, out of Ohio State. Thoughts on JSN?
I think JSN is the potential to be a really strong wide receiver in this offense. I like him in dynasty drafts, mainly because this wide receiver class is getting kind of compressed a little bit. It's JSN and Addison, and then kind of everybody else as far as the top of rookie drafts go. That being said, this year, I don't want any part of him. Like, I just don't believe that he's going to fulfill his ADP. He's the new shiny toy, sure, but he's learning a playbook. He's coming into an offense with established veterans on both sides ahead of him. And while you see a 13 and 18 finish out of your 2 outside receivers, I don't know that JSN is going to come in and really take away from a whole lot of that. Yes, it's another weapon, but I don't see Pete Carroll going to a 63% passing offense, right? Like when you start going pass first run. So he'll do some learning. He'll do some developing. His route running is okay. It's not great. There's going to have to be some development there. But he does well in space with the ball, right? So you might see some of that to kind of change things up and not put all that on DK. I think you're going to see JSN do some of this in-space end-around thing just to give him kind of a different look. But when it's all said and done with, I don't think JSN finishes any higher than wide receiver 40.
Which is about where he is going, right? In that 37 to 40 range. And that's kind of like we talked about earlier, that's kind of that wide receiver, no man's land there with where JSN's going. So that is, need based at that time. If you need depth at wide receiver at that point in your draft, then you look at a JSN, but I think there are, other options there in that pick 90 to 110 range, right? That is what 9th, 10th round in that area, 8th, 9th, 10th round. Like that's kind of that weird, which way do I need to go? Do I start looking at quarterback? Do I start, do I grab a tight end here? Like it's kind of that area. Do I get running back depth? So yeah, I think when it's all said and done, where he's drafted, probably about where he finishes, barring something crazy happening in Seattle. But I don't think this year, but I do think next year. So for Dynasty, like I think this is a guy that you want to get, or maybe 2-3 years down the road when Lockett's contract does finally come off the books and he can kind of emerge as that heir apparent there. But as far as, the expectations that I think that Seattle fans will have for this guy, probably unrealistic, being a first-round draft pick as a receiver. I just don't think he's that type of player that, especially in this offense as it's constructed right now, will, return first-round value in the real world. But I do think with where he's being drafted in the fantasy world, that's about the value that he will return, if not less than that. But I do feel like where he's at is probably his ceiling.
Yeah, this is one of those that I'm going to have a hard time drafting him this season, and I'm just going to go other routes. So you guys both made some really, really good points, to the point where, quite frankly, I'm just going to be out on JSN for redraft this season. There's a lot of other routes I'd rather go, especially with the draft capital, and a guy that probably just not going to be on many of my redraft rosters. Funny enough, though, I was kind of drafting in the middle of the middle rounds in several dynasties, and he was fell to me very conveniently on a lot of those dynasty rosters. So love the value for dynasty where you were able to get him. Redraft, I'm out. Let's hit up the tight end. Noah Fant was tight end 35 last year, 50 receptions, 63 targets, 486 yards, 4 touchdowns, an average of 3.7 targets per game. Thoughts on Noah Fant?
This offense just is not centered around a singular tight end. They have a couple different guys that they focus on. He is a bye-week fill-in. Maybe if there's an injury or two, you look for that and hope for some red zone targets, but very touchdown dependent and a guy who is not going to be on my draft board.
Yeah, I'm not drafting Noah Fant. I just don't think that it's there. Will Dissly's also still on the roster. I'm not in on Noah Fant. He's a streaming option, a break glass in case of emergency guy.
Yeah, Seattle has a ton of targets that go to the tight end, right? They were 5th in the league last year in total targets to tight ends. The problem is that they run so many different tight ends out there to catch those things that the target share gets diluted. Yeah, it's very much not, even though they throw so many balls to the tight end, it's not like you see in Baltimore, Kansas City, where it's one guy absorbing all those targets and they're going to get 100+ targets to it. These guys are going to cannibalize each other to the point where, 50 targets, 60 targets is an exceptional season to it. And even in that case, there's not many red zone targets that really go to the tight ends there to the point where they cannibalize each other on that one as well. So touchdown dependent type of tight end, not a guy that I'm going to be looking for as a late round tight end strategy. I'll find a different guy there. So I like Kevin's thought, bye week fill in, at best type of thing. So let's go ahead and hit up the quarterback room. Geno Smith, QB5 last year, 399 completions, 572 attempts. We're going to round it up and call it a 70% completion percentage, 4,282 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 86 rushes, 366 yards, and 1 touchdown. Thoughts on Geno Smith?
That's one for you.
Currently going off the board at quarterback 15. I do think there's some value there, much like Jared Goff, right? Like It worked well for this offense. He was able to move the offense, used his legs just enough to kind of get you some of those nice little bonus points there on the ground. But I think the recipe's there, right? I think the recipe's there to be knocking on the door at QB 10 or a little bit higher. So there's some value there. Yet another guy to look at. If you're waiting on quarterback, don't be afraid to look at Geno Smith, Jared Goff, like we talked about earlier. He has more weapons now than what he had last year between Charbonnet and JSN. They're still developing their offensive line. So all these things are in his favor, right? So he got a little bit of a contract, right? A little bit of kind of a prove it deal, but he's got a chip on his shoulder and he's a pro. He's been around, he understands, and he might just be one of those late bloomers, right? Kind of the Kurt Warner type. It didn't work very early on in his career. Had to sit behind some people, learned a lot of things, was a sponge, kind of never rested on his laurels, if you will. And then when he got his shot, he's made the most of it. So I like Geno. I know the name value of it kind of scares you off, and that's pushing him down draft boards a little bit. But if you're willing to not necessarily take that gamble, but if you're willing to look past the name, there is value there that you can capitalize on. And there is really little to no reason why he can't finish as a top 10 quarterback once again this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was kind of the fantasy darling last year, right? Like there wasn't high expectations for what Geno Smith was going to be there after Russell Wilson was shipped out of town, and he like continued to just prove people wrong week after week. And if he keeps that mindset of just go out there and play, like there's nothing to lose here, which I think he does. I think he does keep that because he has been in the league for a while. He is, a pro's pro when it comes to how he plays and approaches the game. And I think that's very valuable, especially in cerebral a position as is a quarterback in the NFL. So I like Geno Smith. I think you're going to get massive return on where he's going. And I think that he's honestly, like, if I'm faced with the choice of a Geno Smith or an Aaron Rodgers right now, I'm probably leaning towards Geno Smith, and he's going a couple spots in front of Aaron Rodgers. So, like, I just think that there's more value there with Geno, with what he can do, especially with his legs. He did do just enough with his legs that he did, and he'll keep the interceptions. I think he'll keep the interceptions number down. I think the touchdown number, stays the same or maybe even improves a little bit. But I just think that Geno Smith is another sound, if you're in that 2 QB league and you want to take the flyer on one of those rookies, you can have old reliable there, much like we did say of Jared Goff. Now I do say all that, and then I'm going to say this, which kind of counteracts what the points that I was making earlier with Kenneth Walker. But this Seahawks schedule this year is not very favorable to offense. I mean, they drew the AFC North. They have the NFC East. They are playing a very tough schedule, not to mention that they're in the NFC West already. So it is going to be a tough schedule for Geno Smith, but I still think that there is enough out there that he will be able to finish in that QB1 discussion. It likely won't be QB5 again. I think that was just a wild, the stars aligned there in Seattle, and he was able to put together a wonderful season. But I do think that Geno Smith will provide you everything you need as a QB2 or as your starter in a single QB league, because I just think that there is reliability.
Yeah, I think you're certainly spot on there. Funny enough that you bring up that schedule. He's got the 28th hardest or 28th easiest. So what is that, 4th hardest schedule of fantasy quarterbacks out there this season. So, spot on with that one when you're talking incredibly difficult schedule. Now, all of that being said, when he's coming off the board as QB, 15, 16, kind of depending upon where you're looking at that, you're drafting him at his absolute floor. I don't see that he's going to return value less than about QB 15, 16 when the season's all done. I very well think that you're going to see him get to be a back end QB1 when it's all said and done here, to the point where, not going to surprise me when we look up and we see him finish ranked, QB 8, 9, 10, somewhere kind of in that range. So tremendous value. Will be a guy, certainly a guy that I'll be looking to add on there, even in single QB leagues, just from the standpoint that I can build out a roster to it, and Geno can get me the consistency and get me, the points where I need them, to the point where, it's not going to be, razzle dazzle, but he's certainly not going to necessarily lose me a week out of the quarterback position in a single QB league. And as a super flex QB2, he's got enough firepower there to be able to get the job done and potentially even win you that position. So I'm down for it. Let's ride the Geno train here again this coming season. Any other thoughts here on Geno Smith or the Seahawks? Alrighty. Well, Alex, you asked some questions a while ago, and it's time to answer those. Why don't you go ahead and hop in the pilot's chair there, and Kevin and I'll answer your questions.
I did, and these, I think 4 or 5 weeks ago, these were probably a little bit more relevant, but I still do think that there is time, as we are getting into, dynasty draft season, rookie draft season in those dynasties, but is now, if you haven't already had your rookie draft in a dynasty, is now the best time to start making trades with known commodities, guys that are already established in this league. You know what you're going to get. You know that they have been in the league for a little bit. Is now the best time to start making trades with known commodities for draft picks? Or when are we now in the time? Was 5 weeks ago the time to do it and you've kind of missed your window, or are we in that time now? Like, when is the time to make those draft picks for known commodities, of known commodities for rookie draft picks?
So rookie draft picks are never more valuable than right before or during the draft, right? It's the excitement of, it's what you're looking at. So if you've already had your rookie draft, yeah, you've kind of missed your window a little bit. But there's a lot of dynasty leagues who wait, right? I mean, I personally don't understand the point in why anyone wants to draft a rookie the day after the NFL draft. Like, I would much rather sit on all of them and let's draft them in August when we really know what's going on. Like, everybody has a preference, and that's all fine, well, and good. But I'd much rather wait. With this particular class, was kind of doing the opposite, Alex. I was trying to trade picks for known commodities and figure out where my positions or where my holes are in my roster and kind of what I needed to do. And a couple I was able to do that, and a couple maybe not so much. But it's always interesting because when you play in as many leagues as Derek and I do, you're in enough of them that everybody kind of has their guy. And if you can hone in on who their guy is, especially when you're on the clock, you can dangle that carrot out there a little bit and maximize that return. That being said, one thing that I would look to do is forego this draft and look at next year's draft. I think the skill position players coming out of next year's draft are, especially wide receiver, are going to be much better and much more fantasy relevant right out of the gate than a lot of the receivers that we had coming out this year, right? You have JSN and Jordan Addison kind of coming out, and then everybody's kind of taking flyers on guys, right? Is it Michael Wilson in Arizona? Is it Cedric Tillman in Cleveland? Is it Zay Flowers, right? A lot of people like Zay Flowers. I'm not trusting that necessarily yet in Baltimore. I know we've talked about that. So I think I've passed every opportunity to draft Zay Flowers that I've had this season. It might burn me down the road, but it's just something that I wasn't comfortable with. So, and then you get into all the super flex leagues and everything else. Who's your quarterback? You want Stroud? You want Young? You want Richardson? I took Richardson everywhere I could get him. And then I took Stroud. I don't think I took Bryce Young in a single league through all the rookie drafts that I've done. I've passed over him time and time again. I just don't think that he is going to be as good of a pro as the other two are. So mix and match the bag, but in dynasty leagues specifically, the window's always open, right? It's always trying to hit up your league mates, seeing what they're up to, what their thoughts are on guys. Some guys you get in leagues, they crave the trade. Like, they get bored and they crave the trade. And so you just start talking to them a little bit and you're able to work up some deal that's in your favor just because they want to hit confirm and accept so bad to say that they made a move. Don't be in a rush. You don't have to trade these players. If you like what you have, then, look at building it through the draft. But if you don't like what you have and you want more of an immediate impact, if you're right on the cusp of being a championship caliber team in a dynasty league, maybe you give up a high-end, first-round pick for a known commodity and flip that a little bit to push your team over the edge. So it really is dependent on how your roster construct and your league positioning works out.
Right. And so one of the things that I like doing, right, is, and Kevin, you hit that nail on the head pretty perfect there. The draft pick, the most value, or the most value that draft pick is ever going to have is when it's on the clock. So if you're playing a slow draft, things like that, and you can work a deal, I can't tell you how many times that I'm on the clock in with the first round, and I'm able to trade that pick for a guy that I liked in the previous year's draft or 2 drafts ago. These guys that are still incredibly early on in their career, but you've actually seen them play in the NFL. You've actually seen what they're able to do. And, for whatever reason, the value has diminished to the point where you can get that player that was, a top 5, top 6 pick, a year or 2 years ago. Now you can get them thrown in a trade and get a future first or a future second along with that. So that's kind of one of the things that I like doing. Wait until you're on the clock. Kevin hit that point on the head really well as well when you're talking about kind of knowing your league mates and knowing that, right? So if somebody's got a guy and you know that they're not going to be able to make a move there, you can make a deal that's in your favor, trade for a veteran presence. It doesn't even have to be an old vet or anything like that. It can be a guy still, either approaching his prime or kind of in his prime. You get them in the very good fantasy window there, and then also get a future draft pick on top of it. And you're just kind of compiling those draft picks, and you kind of keep working that system there to the point where you're kind of always, when you're on the clock, you're always kind of moving, and either moving back a little bit or moving, future years type of deal, and gaining additional draft picks where you can. And then certainly going out there and getting guys that are very, very fantasy relevant and very fantasy usable for this season. And, you're not necessarily going to get superstars on there, but you can get guys either before the breakout happens, or you can get guys, maybe it's a running back that's 26, 27 years old, and everybody, freaks out. Oh my gosh, I got to move this guy off because, he's going to hit that wall, right? Well, 26 years old, you still got 2 years, potentially 3 years of very good fantasy production, and you can typically get an additional pick on that for somebody else to go out and get the shiny guy right now. That's the rookie coming in that's never taken a snap in the NFL, and we don't know what that's going to look like and what that's going to translate like. So, and you really kind of boil that down. When the best time to make a move on rookie draft picks? When you're on the clock, trade back, gather more capital, and really make your move to the point where you can really kind of, gather a pretty good war chest of future draft picks to it, doing something like that over the course of 2 or 3 drafts, to the point where you're staring down and you've got a massive number of picks there, and you can really go out and make one of those blockbuster deals for a superstar to put your team over the edge. And now you really are the team that everybody else is chasing. So, kind of boil it down. Just, keep making moves in your favor.
And I'll add one more thing to this too. And I think it's something that, sometimes we lose sight of as fantasy football players, in that in a rookie draft, a first round pick, right? A first round pick in a rookie draft does not always equate to a first round pick in a redraft, right? Like in more times than not, it's not going to, right? So there's that idea that you've got a first round pick. Oh, it's a first round pick. Yeah, it's a first round pick, but let's be real. Like it would be it would be a 5th or a 6th or a 7th round pick if we were doing this as a redraft, right? Like, I think maybe the exception to that is Bijan Robinson this year, right? Like Bijan Robinson is a first round pick in most leagues, regardless, redraft or rookie, right? Like that might be the one exception. But then any pick after that you're making is a 4th or a 5th round if this was a redraft, right? So I think that is something that you might be able to take advantage of, the idea of a first round draft pick, and you might be able to kind of use that to your advantage. But just to keep in mind the perspective of the draft, right? To keep in mind the perspective of, is this actually a first round pick, or is this a 5th or a 6th round pick if I was in a redraft league, or is it even worse than that, right? With where some of these rookies may end up, and what you're spending, on that. So just that's another point that I would add to it in terms of, how you approach these dynasty drafts and how you approach, making the trades and everything, is like, what is the actual value, and not just, the perceived value of a first round pick.
Right. And a lot of folks out there, when it comes to dynasty, will put so much emphasis on, I'm making my team
I've
under
got the 101. I've got the 102. Yeah.
Right. Well, not only that, but right, they put so much emphasis on keeping their team young. And I've drafted my entire rosters under the age of 25 or 26 or, whatever, right? Like it's a 2 to 3 year window. And that's what you're shooting for, is to be competitive and be in a championship window and have players that'll drive you to a championship in those 2 to 3 years, right? Like year 4, right? Like I'm not drafting the rookie so that I can go out there and be concerned on what his second contract looks like. And that's what a lot of times I think a lot of dynasty players kind of lose sight of, is they get worried about getting so young on that they lose sight on the fact that hey, the wide receivers, I can go out there and get a ton of wide receivers and really have a great year on that. My running backs probably going to have their best year in their age 23, 24 season, which is their third or fourth year in the league in a lot of cases, right? And we're so gung-ho about trying to move up there and get younger and all of that. But to kind of drive that point home, right, when you're talking about where the draft capital truly lies, Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy that typically in every Superflex dynasty startup has been going at the 105 in a lot of cases, right? It's Bijan, then it's usually the 3 quarterbacks, and then it's usually Jahmyr Gibbs at the 105, right? And we were talking that he was coming off the board in the 3rd or 4th round as far as a redraft goes. Go a pick later, JSN at the 106, which just about every rookie dynasty drafts that I've been in all year long has been in the Superflex anyway. JSN is the 106. Just call it a day. And 6th, 7th round is the earliest that I've seen him coming off in redraft and in best ball in those formats to it. So even that one pick going from like a 105 to the 106 will have a massive impact on where that guy actually goes in redraft and where you're really valuing that for his rookie year. So there's a lot of that I think you're right that folks do tend to lose sight on.
Very good. I'm glad we finally got to that question 2 months after I posted.
It's all right.
So and folks out there, if y'all think of some other questions like that you want answered, send them in. More than happy to address them. More than happy to spend some time on that and get you all the answers. But guys, any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Enjoy the lull, right? Do some research, understand kind of where the camp battles are, right? That's what you're doing right now. We know who these tier 1 guys are, right? You know who Cooper Kupp is. Yes, we're interested to see where DeAndre Hopkins goes and that fantasy implication. But keep an eye on this Tyreek news, right? Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on what is going on with the legal battles with Alvin Kamara, and then understand what is the camp battle in Minnesota like between Jordan Addison and J.K. Osborne, right? Keep tuned to that, and any little bit of information that you're getting helps make a better informed decision in August when you are looking to draft your roster and be successful, because it is all about that cash and trophies. And here at the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Network, that's what we're here to do and help you with.
Yeah, and to add to the what ifs or the whatabouts is where does Dalvin Cook end up? Does he still have fantasy relevance? Zeke Elliott is still a free agent. Does he still have any fantasy relevance? Is there still any tread on those tires? I mean, there's a lot of things that I think that as camps progress and as teams start to really figure out what they have, and then maybe there's some reactionary things that happen. Or an injury, God forbid, an injury happens, and then all of a sudden those guys get thrust into some fantasy relevance. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. It's going to happen, whether we like it or not. Guys are going to get hurt. It's a physical game, and those are things that you have to pay attention to. And don't be so caught up on their name. But, just like we caution with some of these rookies, landing spot matters, especially with some of these free agents that are still out there. Landing spot does have a big role. And so those are just things to keep in mind before you start, making those moves to get those guys. That landing spot is very crucial to what their value actually is.
Absolutely. Well, guys, that's going to do it for us. Make sure that you're following us on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. And make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@GoodOldBoysFF. Hit that subscribe button. Help us out there. Best way to support this independent podcast. That's going to do it for us tonight. I am Derek. He is Kevin. He is Alex. Have a good one, y'all. Be safe. Toodaloos.